Hello, welcome to Jive Talk. It's another one, this time for April. Spring is here, it's very bright. I hope it's not too bright and that you can see me properly. Hopefully the stream will go well and that my connection speed from here out on the farm will be okay. This is my last month on the farm where I've been working this year. And then I will be relocating to Israel, where I have a new office set up for me, and looking forward to having some sunny weather and Mediterranean food when I get there. But today I'm just going to answer your questions as I always do. The first questions I do before I come to super chats and whatnot are the ones that my patrons on Patreon and Subscribestar have already sent in. So let me just go straight into those without further ado. And I'll also say, just in case for some reason you haven't seen it, this morning I published part 2 of my Anglo-Saxon paganism series. It's all about elves, orcs, ents, all the kinds of things Anglo-Saxons believed in besides their gods. And it's really important for understanding Anglo-Saxon paganism because it's not just about the gods. So make sure you watch that, but not right now. Now you're going to participate in Jive Talk with me. Folks on Subscribestar, what have you asked me? Folks on Subscribestar have said a few questions. Loading. Oh, the connection speed is struggling. Before I come to super chats and whatnot. Kaelin says, recently Heimdall has entered my practice. I believe his Anglo-Saxon name was Hamma. Is this attested anywhere? I am not aware that it is. I really don't think it is, and I'm not sure if that's a valid cognate. Sorry about that. He also asks, he also says, Anglo-Saxon Gods video is very super work, and the reason I finally offer you some small sub, thanks. Well, I thank you for your patronage. I really appreciate it. Fun question. He also asks, another one from Kieran, what is your max deadlift? £400. There's a video on Facebook to the video section. So also he says something about Varg. I'm not going to talk about Varg. I'm bored of that. Chris asks, what does Catholic Europe, what part does it play in our religion? Do you consider medieval poets and philosophers such as Dante to be important stepping stones in reconstructing a pagan religion for today? Not exactly. I think that we have to understand that we are, the inheritors of a 1,000 years of Christianity in Europe, more in some cases, and that has the development of Western philosophy and Western ideas and everything has been influenced by Christianity, and even in those among us who don't choose to practice Christianity, we still have to recognize that, so that you can choose to reject those aspects that you don't want to keep, because some people who claim to reject Christianity but fail to recognize the far-reaching influence of Christianity in all areas of Western thought actually end up just recreating Christianity in another form. But yes, Dante is of value, linguistic and artistic value. I don't know if it informs my paganism. I wouldn't say that necessarily. But obviously the idea of a descent into the underworld, to conversing with people in the underworld, that is very Indo-European. That's an ancient pagan theme, and that's where it comes from. It's no wonder we see it in the likes of Dante, when it's such a prominent thing in so many Indo-European myths. H. Quinn asks, every time me and the lads make a toast, my mate says the act of clinking your glasses and saying cheers comes from rival tribes trying to mix poison into each other's drinks. Is this bollocks? Sounds like bollocks, but I can't tell for sure because I've never researched. He also asks, if the BBC offered you a contract with a big budget to make one documentary on anything, what would that one that suits your expertise, what would that documentary be about? probably I'd try and do something that's not properly well known and needs to have a proper attention. I might do the Indo-European and the Indo-European expansion and the influence of the corded ware culture on history, like its importance on genetics and linguistics across the world. I think that would be quite good. Sorry about people experiencing lag. There's not really anything I can do about that. Yeah, hopefully it'll just speed up in a minute. Okay, that's the subscribe star one's done. I'm sorry if anyone just sent me a super chat. I did think I saw one. Yes, placenta. Thank you, Spensiferous. I will read the super chat. It's just a little bit tricky because I had to go through the Patreon ones first. I prefer to do that. So yeah, the Patreon questions are. Paul Melion asked us about the new Scythian paper, and I said already that I probably won't do a big one on that. I'm not going to do a big answer here on that because that paper could have its own stream. But basically, there's a new thing about Scythian DNA, and it's really a great paper. But it doesn't really change any of our views on it. It's just showing that the Scythians formed from mixtures of people, like in the Iron Age, from preceding Bronze Age cultures. Already from haplogroup evidence, we can tell that the majority of this is coming from Bronze Age steppe peoples, i.e., the white peoples on the steppe. But what is showing is that the Scythians are increasingly influenced by non-white peoples and are mixed with them. That's coming both from the south from their south in the regions of like the what we call Iranic Neolithic like DNA. Not necessarily from Iran, but coming from places also, Bactria Margiana archaeological complex. That's having an influence on the Scythians or Scythians, as well as East Asian DNA is coming in from the east into the steppe. So this is still stuff we already knew, but it's just getting a much more detailed look at what specific regions those are coming from and when they're coming and how they're mixing. So the Scythians are definitely like mutts, if you will. They were mixing with lots of different people. So yeah, this is a cool paper. Paul, okay, Antonio Lalo asked me, what's your view on the left-hand path Tantra-like approach to Nordic pagan spirituality? Do you believe this kind of approach, which is said to be connected to the antinomian aspects of Odin and of his cult, is based on some historical evidence? Yes, it is based on, but I generally take quite a dim view of things. There are things about Odin that are were socially frowned upon. They don't constitute like normal activities for his culture. Such as practicing seder, which, as I said, is related to threads and weaving by its very etymology. I said in the new video, and that shows how it's got a female association, and then we know it was shameful for men to practice it. So there's that, but that doesn't mean that his worshippers thought that they had to do that. And there's other things. We know that in Norse society there were people who didn't fit in, and there's a lot of shaming of these kind of people who didn't meet up to the gender expectations or social expectations of other kinds that their society imposed on them, and so they were therefore like non-conformist in a way. Yet at the same time, while they were also shamed for it, they were also sort of integrated into certain roles that were specific to their kind of weirdness. And nowadays, in a society where we basically are encouraged to celebrate the weird and the other as a kind of ideal, it's held up as a kind of something to celebrate. It's inevitable that people who are reconstructing this old religion are going to focus on these divergent or deviant sorts of people and try to emulate that and say this is an authentic representation of that religion. Don't think that's right. And generally, I think that the left-hand path is extreme. That when people follow it, it's often. I don't speak for everyone. I'm not saying it's not always bad. I'm sure there's legitimate sort of left-hand path things in various kinds of traditions, but generally it seems to me that people who say they're following the left-hand path are doing it because they just want to continue behaving like they have always behaved, with the vices that they've always suffered from, and just pretend that it has a spiritual aspect so that they don't really have to make the sacrifices necessary for spiritual development. That is what I think. Bill asked me, to what extent do you think that Celtic paganism and beliefs have influenced those of the Anglo-Saxons? What do you think the attitude towards these people and their beliefs was by the early Anglo-Saxons? I don't think, Bill, that there were such interactions. There might have been some. It's kind of like the Anglo-Saxons mostly converted by the 8th century. Before the Vikings come, there were probably some lingering pagan practices in the countryside in England. I'm sure there were, in fact. So it's quite likely that Viking pagans, when they arrived, encountered something that resembled Germanic paganism in the countryside. But we don't have any record of that occurring. So what we can speculate that whether it did or didn't is a possibility. So as for, Anglo-Saxons, when they were arriving, we know that the country is nominally Christian, but there were definitely some pockets of Celtic paganism, such as in Devon, here in Devon. But the Welsh were sending missionaries to Devon from Wales to just try and convert the last stragglers of pagans in the West Country. But the Anglo-Saxons didn't get out western England till quite a long time after the invasions began. So by the time the Anglo-Saxons got to England, by the time the Anglo-Saxons got to the West Country, they were themselves already nearly Christian, because it took them a good 200 years, and they were already nearly entirely Christian anyway. So it's not something that I think happened. I don't think that there were many encounters between Anglo-Saxon pagans and Celtic pagans. And I don't think Anglo-Saxon paganism was heavily influenced by Celtic paganism, although there could have been some residual influence due to landscape things, because there were still parts of the landscape that were pagan from Celtic paganism, like sacred springs, Roman pagan ruins of temples, Celtic Romano temples, or all kinds of things like this that were considered holy by Celtic pagans, and even though they converted to Christianity, they still probably revered them to a certain extent. And when the Anglo-Saxon pagans come in, it seems like they've kind of just integrated these holy places. But generally, influence, and it's hard to see what that influence was. I can't think off the top of my head of pointing to any specific thing that was clearly of Celtic influence on Anglo-Saxon paganism. That's not to say there wasn't some kind of influence, though, but it's going to be an indirect one from Celtic Christians who have preserved pagan Celtic customs, rather than directly like interaction between Celtic pagans and Anglo-Saxon pagans. Elliot Parsons asks, do you see the revival of Anglo-Saxon paganism as a key to a wider revival of traditionalist thought and practice? Also, do you think the primary force behind the traditionalist movement is reactionary or revolutionary? Which side, if either, do you prefer? I think that Anglo-Saxon paganism is something that interests me for personal reasons, mainly because I am English. But I do hope that people who watch it inspired to a similar way. And it's not like I want everyone in the whole world to be, take the same interest in Anglo-Saxons that I do. It's more like I'm taking this approach to my history, and I think everyone should try to do something similar. So yes, in that sense, but Anglo-Saxons are specific interest to the English and people of English descent. So maybe and they have still have quite a large cultural influence in the world, thanks to America. So perhaps the increasing influence in that will be have a wider influence on other people and other cultures to preserve and be proud of their ancient heritage. And as for it being revolutionary or reactionary, those two terms are kind of loaded, and I know some traditionalists have described themselves as as reactionary and revolutionary, or saying Evola said traditionalism is the most revolutionary cause of our times. So yeah, he's being a little bit like, it's a bit hyperbolic, but I'm not really interested in answering in that because of the loaded terminology. What do you think of projects like Pleistocene Park? I'm not sure what that is. Is that like a creationist theme park? Sorry, I can't answer because I don't really know about it. But if it is a creationist theme park, I think it's silly. Are there any good sources on Germanic and Anglo-Saxon law? One person asked. I'd say yes, there are quite a lot, and the Wikipedia page can get you started on that, because a lot of stuff was written down about law, more so than about Anglo-Saxon paganism. And there's great stuff on Icelandic law too. You can get the Icelandic law codes, it's all written down. That's not something that isn't too poorly preserved. Dan Davis, the author, asks, much work has been done on the Indo-European religion and worldview, and archaeologists have looked at shamanism along with material culture in an attempt to imagine historical hunter-gatherer mindset. But do you know of any work on the various European farmers, megalithic culture, religion and worldview and languages? I know Mike Parker Pearson has developed theories on life and death with Stonehenge, etc., but not much more. I have not read anything specifically on that topic, but I have read excerpts from a book which I found very helpful called The First Farmers of Europe by Stephen Shannon. And that's really a great book. And it's more about genetics and the archaeology and the religion in that context. Because anything about the religion is really going to be speculative. And I'd say that anyone who tries to make a lot of claims about the religion of the Neolithic people is probably veering quite heavily on the side of speculation. And I don't find it that interesting to hear. I wouldn't find it interesting to read a book entirely made of speculation. Sometimes speculation can be interesting, but I think in the case of megalithic religion, you're really going to be a lot of speculation. Oh, goodness me, I'm missing all the super chats. Jacob Butler, will you be covering Judaism while in Jerusalem? Yes, I might look into converting to Judaism while I'm there. Seems like a religion on the up, a lot of benefit from research. KCM offers $5. What are your thoughts on Latvia? I'd love to go there and see how they celebrate winter solstice. I went there once for my stag do, had a good laugh, got drunk, didn't do much history, shot some clay pigeons, did a bit of quad biking in the woods, good laugh. Lovely country, I was only in Riga, lots of nice things. I've been to Latvia as well, also when I made that video about the sacred Stelmusa oak, which is sacred to Perkonos, the thunder god. But I was actually on holiday in Lithuania, and I just jumped over the border because the oak is right by the Lithuanian border, so I haven't explored Latvia a great deal. Which Asian population are Finns most related to? Asked Henry Walker. Depends what you mean by Asian. Any Finnic-speaking ones, basically, the Siberian ones. The Finnic peoples, Finno-Ugric peoples. What are your... we've done that. Campfire Hales, $4. One book, what do you recommend for Anglo-Saxon reading? Just about Anglo-Saxons in general. Stenton's Anglo-Saxon England is it called, but if you just want, I don't know what kind of, it depends what area you're most interested in, but it's just an introduction. I think there's a Oxford introduction to Anglo-Saxon is probably quite good. Shitty 80s movie lover gives me $9. Thank you for your donation, and says, long time fan, you're a fantastic documentarian, and the latest videos might be the best yet. Keep up the good work. And what topic will be next? Well, I've got a couple of ideas for videos I really want to make. One is about holes, how holes and looking through holes in trees and stones and whatever play a part in different pagan religions. I just think that's interesting, but it might not go viral or anything. The other one I wanted to do was talking about binding and unbinding and why there's such prominent parts of prayers and spells in so many different pagan religions. But it's something that nobody cares about now. Nobody wants to pray for unbinding. Nobody prays to a god of unbinding or binding. And that's a problem because it's such a prominent part of the old pagan religions. So maybe we're missing something. So I wanted to take a look at that. But again, that's not going to be a popular video if I do. One I'll do for popularity will probably be something on Scythian religion, because I think that'll get more hits. But yeah, hold on a second. I've just got to get something. Yes. I'm back. Do other streamers do this? Do other streamers just get up and get a beer? One of my fans sent me this. I want to show this. It's made of metal, and it's got it's like a runestone, and it's got an inlay of the Survive the Jive logo and silver coloured metal and gold coloured metal, brass probably, and some runes around it that say Whomst the dankest is. Whomst is the dankest. Very funny. In reference to an old video I did about Woden back in 2017. So, the Himmel, asks, to Israel, have you researched the ethnic origins of Ashkenazic Jews? There's sufficient evidence for the Slavic Iranic hypothesis over the accepted Rhineland hypothesis. Good studies by Aaron L. Hayek. Yes, I have researched it a bit. Evidently, there is, yeah, I mean, the thing is, the majority of their European DNA comes from Southern Europe. Somewhere, you know, they're obviously somewhere from the Roman Empire. I think they have specific affinities with North Italians. There is some evidence that it could be there, but also I've seen some people say that because they're definitely about 40% Middle Eastern or Near Eastern and about 60% Southern European. They don't have much Slavic or Germanic blood, despite spending most of their history of the last millennium in German and Slavic countries. But yeah, it looks like could be Greek actually. Their European blood could be Greek or Anatolian, which would explain something. They plot like Anatolians on a PCA, basically. They do plot like pre-Turkic Anatolians. So that's quite interesting. Your content is life-changing, says Josh Phillips. Thank you for it. Or thank you for your donation, Josh. Jacob Barker, everyone should convert to Judaism. Yes, I agree. Everyone, do so. Rex Romanum, should I convert to Judaism? Yes. Anderson, you can convert to... Okay. Elgato, are you a genetic scientist? I don't have any qualifications in genetic science. I'm a historian, and I've been reading population genetics papers and learning about population genetics since 2016. So that's you know, if you want to only listen to people who have qualifications in genetic science, that's fine, but do that. But what you'll find is that when they talk about history, they don't have a degree in history. So you can't listen to anything they say about history. And they also talk about archaeology, but they don't have a degree in archaeology. And the archaeologists will genetics, so then you're stuck, you see. But actually, I'm taking the piss because the way that population genetics works is that historians, archaeologists, and geneticists work in interdisciplinary study together to come to conclusions. If they didn't, then their conclusions wouldn't be worth very much because they would not be informed. So, you know, that's why these big DNA papers are not just written by geneticists. They are collaborations with historians, archaeologists too. I'm not a geneticist. I never said I was a geneticist, and I never led anyone to believe I was one. So, yes, I'm not a geneticist. What do you think of Indo-European polytheism in Brazil? I didn't know it existed, but I don't know what kind of. I mean, I guess if you're in Brazil, the probably Roman might be the most likely one because you're going to be of Iberian descent. So, thank you for that $2, Nate the Ape. I'd be very interested to see what kind of paganism is practiced in Brazil. I understand that the African slaves in South America who practice Santeria or Batmacumba or whatever it's called, the different kinds of paganism, are very influenced by the folk traditions of Europeans, and that's been overlooked. It's always just seen as Catholicism meets African paganism, but a lot of their practices are clearly recorded in European folk customs and that must have pagan origins in Europe. So it's possible that some of the early settlers passed on some who worked with the slaves were passing on some folk customs to the slaves. I don't know much about it though. Not my area. Man says, who the TF are Indo-Europeans? You come to the wrong stream, my friend. You come to the wrong stream. Was there an Indo-European god of the underworld like Hades, or was he an imported god? I assume so, because or at least a goddess. I think there was at least a goddess. Someone, Redbeard's in the chat. He says, great question. I think but he's answering someone else's question that I missed. What was the question? I can't find it. But thank you, Redbeard, for answering the question I missed. Good man. Yeah, he's saying European R1B seems to come from a local founder effect among a branch of R1B bearing corded ware culture peoples. Yeah, the L51 that's common in the Belbeaker culture, we have to find out where it came from, because although Yamnaya, they have most of their DNA from Yamnaya, and Yamnaya have R1B. As far as I'm aware, the subclade of R1B associated with the Belbeaker expansion is not found in any Yamnaya samples. And there's no way that the Yamnaya culture just suddenly had a breakaway that went all the way past all the corded ware regions that later grew up and then came into Western Europe. So obviously the Belbeaker culture is a growth from the single grave culture of the corded ware area in Northern Europe. And it's coming out of Denmark and Northern Germany into Holland. So I'm going to guess that this R1B L51 lineage up. I think that's what Redbeard was trying to say. X Krugers says, your videos have been pivotal in my understanding of my ancestry. Thanks. Have you ever taken it upon yourself to prove the existence of the gods? That just strikes me as a really a bit of a cringe undertaking, like this internet blood sports, like debating, trying to win debates as if that assumes that the opinion of the mass of people is the most likely to be true, when often the thing that's most likely to be true is the very thing that most people don't want to believe in many cases, not always. I mean the Platonists have already dealt with this. The philosophers in Greece have often dealt with why it's right to believe in the gods. Some kind of scientific way, that's an absurd undertaking, because you're using it's like looking at footprints and saying, how can we use this footprint to prove the existence of feet? I mean, you can always say, well, there's a footprint, it comes from a foot. And then someone says, but how do we know that feet exist? We can't see the feet, we can only see the footprint. So therefore, that's not evidence. Well, then, that's the argument. Basically, it's two stupid arguments. It's just pointless. I mean, either you think the footprint was made by a foot, or you believe that feet don't exist because unless you can see them. So it's just a very boring argument. and I'm not interested in convincing atheists because I'm not proselytism isn't a necessary part of my religion. Ash Lee, €5. Thank you very much. Is Aryan a Proto-Indo-European or Indo-Iranian term? J.P. Mallory, Germanic Celtic Slavic. Well, J.P. Mallory is saying that it is an Indo-Iranian term with cognates in non-Indo-Iranian languages. The term Aryan is definitely Indo-Iranian, or Arya in Indic languages. But yes, it does seem. I mean, most linguists seem to agree that this comes from a Proto-Indo-European root, Harios, or Arios. I can't pronounce it properly. It's got like laryngals and everything. And I think the laryngeal that's supposed to be used is also contested, which Celtic, Baltic, Slavic, etc., and it often means a free man or one of the own. And no, it wasn't exclusively of Asian origin or anything like that. So there you have it. But the specific form Aryan is Indo-Iranian. It comes from there. Gage gives me $5 and says, have you done or plan on doing a video about the Swabians? No, I have not, and I do not plan to. They aren't specifically unique in themselves to warrant that. In my opinion, I talk about Germanic people, or Germanic religion. This is a thing about religion. There's literally nothing we know specifically about the Swabian religion that is distinct from other religions at all. It's just Germanic practices, and are the only all the sources are Roman, and they don't even know really what the difference between Swabians and other Germanics is. And there's a lot of mislabeling of people as Swabians. For example, the so-called Swabian knot is demonstrably, from archaeological evidence, not exclusive to the Swabi at all. So whatever the Romans are saying about the Swabi is not necessarily Swabian. Did you hear they managed to identify who Jack the Ripper was through DNA? Yes, I heard that. I heard that they found DNA, and but it's I got in an argument with a Jack the Ripper expert on it because I said that was evidence, and he said, well, the thing is that cloth could have been used by any of the clients. I believe, and they found some DNA on it, one of the victims or something, and the DNA was Ashkenazi sort of DNA, and they thought that confirmed that this one of the suspects was Ashkenazi. But the thing is, the whole area of Whitechapel was a Jewish area, so if a prostitute had been working in Whitechapel, she would definitely have some Jewish DNA on her anyway. So because all her clients would have been Jewish, probably, or most of her clients would have been Jewish, living in working in such an area. So it's not conclusive really to point to who the but it's interesting. It's a bit of fun, I suppose. I think it's more just for getting headlines than newspapers would do. Lovely view from the window. Yep, but won't be like this for long. Instead, you'll see a wailing wall out there instead next time I stream. £10 from Sam Gray. Have a beer on me. Cheers, Sam. Probably have two for £10 if the pub's open ever. Don't know how much they're going to up the tax to try and pay for all this lockdown stuff, but hopefully it won't be to £10 a beer. What's your take on I1's origins and spread? Well, I1's really interesting haplogroup. I might do a video on it sometime, but I've been putting it off because I just thought I want to wait until they actually find a pre-Indo-European sample, because all of the I1 samples we have now are very Indo-European. They're definitely from Indo-European context, the early ones I mean. It's coming from like the battle axe culture. It's coming from a very few select corded ware samples in the late Neolithic, and then suddenly in the Nordic Bronze Age it gets a founder effect where it expands the early Proto-Germanic culture. So obviously it was introduced into Scandinavia via the corded ware culture, mostly R1A. But when did the corded ware culture pick up I1? We don't know. Since I2 is associated with Western hunter-gatherers, it's quite reasonable to assume that I1 was also, but we don't have any Western hunter-gatherer samples with I1, nor even do we have any Neolithic farmer samples with I1, but surely there must have been some Western hunter-gatherers who passed it on to Neolithic farmers, and then it survived in a pocket of farmers, and then the corded ware people picked it up. But this is speculation because we don't have any samples for the Indo-Europeans, so we can't tell yet. But yeah, that's the most likely, had the similar journey of I2, preserved from the Mesolithic into the Neolithic, and then was picked up by corded ware, and then suddenly became much more common in the... Oh yes, what I'm saying is also being reiterated in the chat by Redbeard. It's like I1's likely route, Central European WHGs to Central European farmers, then to North Central corded ware, and then Scandinavian corded ware founder effect, Germanic migrations. But we don't know for sure right now. He's just said what I said, but in a much more compact way. Can you make an educated guess on the original language of the pre-Celtic population of Britain? There's been a speculated language called Northwest Indo-European. I think it was Mallory who invented this term. It's purely speculative, but I mean, the corded ware culture is speaking basically a late form of Proto-Indo-European, and so whatever the Bell Beaker culture is bringing in is going to be a variant of that, which we could completely speculatively term as Northwest Indo-European. But it's what does that mean? We've got no written records of it, and we're never going to know anything about it. So it's, yeah, if you like to speculate. Redbeard saying Neolithic France and Neolithic Hungary apparently each have one I1 sample which lacks step affinity apparently. Ah, that's interesting. Then we will see it really blow up in late Neolithic and Bronze Age Scandinavia. Okay, so the Hungary one didn't have any step affinity. I didn't know that. Well, I thought that was with step affinity. I thought they were already in Indo-European context. Gage asks me, I live in the Cheyenne Arapaho Nation and was invited to Sundance in July. It was explained like it was a strict church. What do you think about this? That sounds really cool. I hope you have a really lovely time. That sounds like it'll be a great experience. That's very nice of them to invite you to their tribal rituals. I don't know much about those rituals, but I would love to be invited to them and to watch them. Gary Macmillan, have another 2 beers. Love your channel. Looking forward to watching part 2 of Anglo-Saxon Paganism. Cheers, Gary. Cheers. Much appreciated. 10 quid. Yeah, I hope you enjoy the video. I'm very pleased with the new one. I found some decent looking stock footage for it. I was quite pleased with that. Yeah. Was the film Midsummer anti-pagan? Arbane Sword. Well, I could answer that, but I already did a full hour-long talk on the subject on the podcast called Guide to Culture. And I reckon you should just have a look at that, because I really went over it in detail, because I know a lot of people hated the film and said it was just fully anti-pagan. And I can understand why they did, but I discuss, why you can read it in other ways. I certainly think that there were anti-pagan things about it, but I think there's a more nuanced look you can take. And certainly, even if the author intended it to be anti-pagan, which is possible, you don't have necessarily. The text speaks for itself and is experienced by the audience how they choose to experience it. So please do check out that podcast I did. Garrett says, your channel's the reason I changed from a bio to an anthropology major. Okay, Garrett. Well, don't blame me. Don't blame me for the consequences, please. I guess you were doing biology. You're doing a STEM, and then you've moved to anthropology, a humanity. I cannot be held responsible for the consequences of that decision. I never said to anyone to study humanities. You will struggle to find a career. Put it that way. There's not much work going around, and there's a lot of competition. So, and also there's a very, very strong cancel culture in the humanities. You know, you have to say exactly what you're supposed to say, or you get cancelled. Josh Phillips, $10. I forgot to say, I bought 3 of your T-shirts. I'll send you to the underworld, boy. You bought 3 of those. Oh, good. Yeah, I made some T-shirts with a beautifully designed Gaulish warrior by Christian Sloane Hall with the slogan, "I'll send you to the underworld, boy." You can get those in my Teespring store. Yes. Did you enjoy Dover Hattie's unbiased history of Rome? I thought it was hilarious, especially since my ancestry is Greek and German. I did laugh sometimes, and yeah, it was good. He puts a lot of effort into his videos, and it's very funny how he's so biased against Germans, and he's very funny. But I'd say pace is a little bit fast for my liking. I don't like fast-paced things, generally. But yeah, it's good. Good fun. Kirill Alesh gives me some Czech money. Thank you. 10 quid, he says. Thank you for telling me how much it is, because I got no idea. For a couple of pints. Are you aware of Nassim Taleb's assertion that Jesus was not non-white? I wasn't aware of that particular absurd assertion by Taleb, but I have seen many other of his cursed takes. I never even spoke to the man or heard of him. And then when I used to have a Twitter account before I deleted it, I learned about who he was, and then I went to find that he'd already blocked me before I even knew who he was. Apparently he's very heavy-handed on the block button. But I gather that his book actually has some interesting insights, and that he's not a complete lolcow. He does have some worthwhile opinions, but he's very much of the opinion, which is valid, that the Mediterranean culture constituted... the Mediterranean world was a historic unit, far more than Europe was. And that's actually true. I agree with him on that. Like, Greece was more affiliated with what we now think of as Asia and the Near East and Anatolia than it is with... In that sense, he's correct. But then he makes other assertions like saying they're white. Well, no, because the idea of white and Europe came later in the Middle Ages and never included such places. Even though, okay, you did have, before the loss of Jerusalem, like the fall of Jerusalem, there was still, through the pilgrimage route, a sense of a spiritual centre in the Levant for Christians. But when it was populated by Muslims, the otherization of the Levant was already underway. But also, when we look at a modern view of Europe, genetically, Europe is a distinct unit, and there is a gap between Europe and the Near East. And also that even non-European, even people from all over the world can easily distinguish a European. That is just not true. In Britain, for example, I'll Levant a Lebanese person as non-white. That would be a legal definition of Middle Eastern. Whereas in America, I think they do class them as white. White is a nebulous and certainly a modern label, a moniker. It didn't exist in the ancient world, and even the medieval people didn't use it. And obviously Levant and the Near East is the closest relative to Europeans, and he uses those 3 facts to try and sort of say that, I don't know, Lebanon is white or something. But I mean, I think it's silly. He's obviously not part of Europe. He's not European. Lebanon is not European. It will never be European. It's not part of our... They're not like us. They're not culturally like us. They don't behave like us. I mean, I've been to the Middle East, not to the Levant, but I've been to other Middle Eastern countries. They're not like us. They're very, very foreign. Even Turkey, I don't see it as European, even though Anatolia is arguably used to be very much European because it was, Greek. But Taleb has his own reasons for arguing those kinds of things, and a lot of Christian identity people want to argue that Jesus was white. And also, I've heard lots of people say the Levant used to be white before the Arab expansion. That's bullshit. That's not true. People from, Philip the Arab, whatever, there were Arabic Roman emperors, and they were, lots of Arabs in the Levant, in the Roman Levant. There were Arabs there, and it's like the Arab language spread before the Arabic expansion. There was Arabic identity in the Levant before the spread of Islam. It's not the way people say, and it was, the Semitic language is always, the Levant has had many different genetic influences coming in from other areas, but like the Neolithic Iranian admixture is coming in. They're not just Levantine hunter-gatherer, they've got Neolithic Iranian farmer ancestry coming in, as well as other forms of ancestry. But they've never been anywhere close to like the European genetic cluster. And culturally they're just not European. So whether you're talking about genetics or culture, they're not European. So why pretend that they are? It doesn't make any sense, unless it's some kind of personal problem that he has to be. He just wants to not be regarded as Middle Eastern for some reason. I don't know. What else have we got? So yeah, in other words, Jesus was not white, and there's no way he was white, and it's silly to say things like that. Gage, again, thank you, Gage. $5. Thoughts on Graham Hancock's research on his new book, America Before, or thoughts on Graham in general? I don't know who that is, sorry. If Holden Morrison, that's an interesting name. I like that name, Holden Morrison. $10. If an African and a European mix, how many generations does it take for the African genes to be bred out? Well, I can only say that it is possible to inherit 0 DNA from an ancestor 6 generations ago. That's the minimum amount of generations to inherit 0 DNA. But you can inherit, if you have an ancestor from 6 generations ago, you probably don't have 0 DNA from them, but you probably have very little DNA from them. So roughly 6 generations to get to 0, or certainly to a very small number. Michael Fortino gives me $10. Great content like always. Thank you for the knowledge you work so hard to spread. Well, thank you, Michael. Were Gaels the elite bell-beakers who came from the Rhine area who introduced Celtic religion culture to Ireland? No. No. Definitely. By Gaels, do you mean like Gaelic speakers? I'd say that the Gaelic speakers have the least amount of Celtic DNA of all the people in the British Isles. The apparent thing that Reich is showing, and he's just talked about it, it hasn't been properly analysed, but what we're seeing now is that there is European Farmer Neolithic DNA in Britain at the end of the Bronze Age, so like 1,000 years after the bell beakers come. And that's about when the Celtic languages start to be introduced. So I'm thinking it seems likely that the Celtic languages were introduced to Britain not by people, Proto-Celts from the Proto-Celtic heartland just north of the Alps in Central Europe, but rather by Celtified French people, or people from somewhere like France or Holland, and they were coming over, and they're more south shifted than the bell beaker inhabitants of the British Isles had formerly been. So that's why you get, especially in the south of England, at the beginning of the Bronze Age, a bit more south-shifted DNA, because that's where the Celts are coming in. And and even going as far forward as medieval times, the most north-shifted people in the British Isles are the people in the north part of the British Isles, like the Scots. So the more north-shifted they are, the less of that DNA from that Celtic invasion they have. So genetically. Do you plan on writing any more books or doing any audiobooks? I gave Spirit of Yule to my nephew. Well made. Cheers. I do plan on writing a book of my own and publishing it myself. Audiobooks is something that interests me. I would like to do that. I don't know what I could read. I don't know about how to monetize audiobooks, but I would be up for reading books and doing that for if I can make some money off of it. That could be quite fun. And I certainly want to write a book and publish it one day, but I keep procrastinating I'm so busy with this channel, to be honest. That's why I don't do anything else. I've got a baby son, I've got a wife, and I've got the channel. And if I'm not dealing with one of these things, then I'm trying to sleep usually. That's the only thing, or go to the gym. I have my time is very much full. I'd have to lay off the channel for a bit if I wanted to write a book. So maybe I'll do that one day. £5 from Saint Longshanks. How do you think modern pagans should view virtue ethics? How might a unified moral framework be established, if indeed it should be? I'm not really sure what you're talking about there. It sounds like a big philosophical question. I don't know what you mean. Sorry, I don't want to talk about something I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry. What lost knowledge to the modern day? Asks El Monk. You can only choose one. One what? One knowledge. One knowledge. You may have one knowledge only. I don't understand that framing of the question. Or one type of paganism. I would love if we had some record of exactly how Germanic rituals were practiced, because we've got some Germanic mythology preserved thanks to the Norse sources, which is great, but nobody wrote about except like you got little keys, like in little clue to a funeral from that Arabic source, Ibn Fadlan, and you've got like little bits here and there about like what might be a ritual in Icelandic material, and we've got, of course, lots of archaeological evidence of rituals. But I wish there was a written source on Germanic ritual. That would be lovely, because like we know so much about Roman ritual, which is great, and we know so much about like Rigvedic ritual, which is great. It would be really cool. Were Druids Celtic priests, so to speak? Yes, they were. Love your channel, Tom. Thanks from Iowa. Thank you, Matthew, for that. Matthew sent me $5. Thank you, Matthew. Oh, the check's back. Kirill has given me a bit more money, and he says, here in the Czech Republic, we have a tradition on Easter Monday where we take a pomlazka, which is a braided stick made out of willow rods, and whip any females we encounter to keep them fertile in exchange for shots. Shots of vodka or something, I presume. That sounds marvellously good fun. I've seen some of the things all around Europe with this, like, here in Britain, there's many traditions where we have to, whip the girls, or like there's folk customs where the girls get chased by the whatever, like the os, for example, on May Day. And I know that there's Alpine rituals where they whip the girls during them. I think that's Christmas time, where some kind of like people in costume whip the girls for fertility. And of course, we know that Lupercalia in Rome had whipping of the women with goat hide straps, and that made them fertile. And it's all done in good fun, by the way. Before anyone says it's misogynistic, it's not. The women enjoy it in the context. It's not done to hurt them. It's like a fun game, young boys chasing the girls around and whipping them gently, or not hurting them. So that Czech sounds like an example of that. It would be very interesting to think about where the origin could come from, whether it has an Indo-European origin, or whether it was disseminated through later means from a Roman source. If it's in Slavic and all these different British and whatever places, it could be very old indeed. It's fascinating. I'd love to see such things. I'd love to go and have a look at that custom. Lycurgus, $5. If society collapses, become a meat-eating horse-riding conqueror, or grow your own food. Well, whether you can grow your own food depends on where you live, I suppose, and what kind of land you have access to. I don't like these hypotheticals. This is silly. Does mummery, Chewy asks, practiced in England, still practiced in England? We still have mummers. Have pagan roots to Yule, or is it separate tradition, independent, that became linked to Christmas? Well, mummers aren't just linked to Christmas. You get mummers and mummery all different times. The term mummer is quite broad and can be applied to all sorts of things. Some of them are evidently not pagan in origin. For example, it's associated with medieval miracle plays, which are very often morality plays based on biblical stories. So that's not pagan. But you could say that these like folk theatre productions were themselves based on earlier pagan folk theatre productions. We don't know. That's pure, of course. And some of the things that have been classed as mummery in the British Isles and the associated dances have certainly been speculated to be of pagan origin and are associated with calendar rituals which are quite likely to be pagan in origin. So there's that. And also, I personally think that the mummers wearing blackface is a documentary film about that called and they did an English version of it, which you can see. It's pay-per-view. It's an independently produced film. We went all around Europe looking at mummery and also some of these traditions where people whip the women and wear masks, and there's all these different, wild hunt traditions across Europe. It's really interesting. It's cool. It's worth like £4 or whatever it costs to see it, to support independent cinema. It's made by a bloke who wanted to redeem the Dutch for their accused of racism for having their blackface tradition. He wanted to show that it has a pagan origin. It's a great film. Mr. Greenblank gives me $10 and says, I greatly appreciate your content. I came across your channel recently and you became one of my favorite content creators. Thanks from a mestizo in Texas. Howdy doody. I don't know how to say speak Texan. You're welcome, you hear? Joseph Stead, £5, says, can one solely worship Hengist Horsa? Live in Kent and I'm slightly obsessed with Kent's Old Kingdom, going to St. Augustine's Abbey yet again tomorrow. I don't know. I think you can worship Hengist and Horsa, but solely? I don't know. Well, that would be a novel form of worship, but I'm sure... I can tell you that if they are, as I speculated, the descendants of the Alkis cult, which is a Germanic cult of two horse twins in earlier in Germania, then the priests have to cross-dress. So if you want to be a priest of Hengist and Horsa, it means you've got to wear a skirt. If you believe the Roman sources, anyway. I'm not serious, by the way. You don't really have to. I'm not telling him to. You have to take HRT. There's no other choice for you now, man. Kentish lads on HRT. Well, it looks like we've come to the end of the stream. I hope you all enjoyed it. I've had a good time chatting to you and answering your questions. I do apologise for the lag, as usual. That's the problem with live streams, isn't it? You can't guarantee rural connection speed. But I can guarantee that you will love my new video, part 2 of the Anglo-Saxon Paganism series. So please go and give it a watch right now if you haven't already seen it. And if you have already seen it, then do me a favour. Share it with everyone you know. Get it going viral. Get it going viral for me. Sorry, I've got another super chat. Please stop sending super chats now. I'm not answering any more questions, but I'll just quickly say what he says. What do you? Oh, now you all start sending them. Triumphant says, "What do you know about the Gallic deities Tyrannus, Tutatis, and other such mainland Celtic gods?" Not a great deal. Not a great deal. I don't know about that sort of thing. Yaga, it gives me some unknown currency. Any interest in Mesopotamian folklore, paganism? There were Ishtar worshippers among Christian Assyrians till 10th century. Is that so? I didn't hear about that. That's